right started. I want to thank everyone for coming today. For the educators in the room, the reason that we're here, I think maybe, and I've explained it to you in the email, is for us to begin to have some conversation around police reform as per the executive order through the governor back in June. And so the Public Safety Committee has been tasked with working with the police department to put together a plan that has to be submitted to the state by either April 1st or April 2nd. Part of that plan requires that we meet with various stakeholder groups throughout the community to get a sense of what they feel about local policing. And so one of the stakeholder groups that you guys are a part of is the education community. I asked for K-12 education to be represented here because there are different things that happen at different levels. And I met with the elementary school on Tuesday. So some of what they felt would probably be a little different than how you feel with regard to what you believe law enforcement should do or how they could better be more supportive of the district. So this is actually probably a pretty good conversation in that it could be more targeted on middle and high school level concerns. So I would like if everyone could just go through the room and introduce themselves and what their role is, what school they represent, as well as the city council members who are here. So I'm Tamu Reinhardt. I'm on the Public Safety Committee, and I will be kind of facilitating this meeting. So next.
I guess I'll go next. Hi, I'm Tom Nelson. I'm on the city council and a teacher at Bruceburg.
Vicki James, city council.
Brent Sheldon, city councilman, chairman of the Public Safety Committee, which is tasked to look into police reform.
Dave Gowen, Jefferson Middle School Planning Center.
Shannon Volpe, Jefferson Middle School Social Studies teacher.
Sam Kadri, Jamestown High School technology teacher.
Kate Cusimano, school counselor at Jefferson Middle School.
Ashley Nude, I'm a counselor at Jamestown High School.
Carol Smith, assistant principal at Jefferson.
Leslie Milquist, principal at Jefferson.
I'm Dana Williams, principal at Jamestown High School.
And Christopher Roberts, social studies teacher, Global 1 and 2, Jamestown High School.
Celia Wilson, ENL para, Jamestown High School.
Is that everyone? I have my phone, so I can only see 4 people at a time. So I'm assuming that everyone was in. So we'll just get right into it. I did supply your principals earlier today with a list of questions that we may start off with. And these are very general questions. However, what we're finding is that depending on your lens through which you look, your responses or your suggestions or things that you just would like to share with the committee may vary based on middle or high school or some of the other experiences that you've had with law enforcement. So I'm going to ask these questions, but we don't necessarily have to stick to these if you feel that there are other things that are more important or some things that you would like to add to the conversation. So the first question that I will propose is, what do you feel is the role of the local police department?
We at Jefferson said that we feel that the local police department in our community should enforce laws that promote a safe community.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what we kind of feel, enforce laws, maintain order, protect citizens.
I'll add creative and multi-strategy approach to investigating crime and preventing crime. Partner with community organizations and leaders to enhance communications and networking for better understanding of the concept of multiculturalism and crime prevention.
Okay. Anyone else?
Mine would be simply just to serve and protect the community. It sounds a little like a bumper sticker, but maybe it's that simple. And yeah,
On the first response, when you said enforce the law, I'll tag along to that. Enforce the law equally among all residents.
When you say serve and protect, I'm thinking about the term serve. Can you expand upon that a little bit for me? I don't remember who said that. I only have Jane,
well, I
Vicky, and
did.
Shannon.
And
Is that you,
anyone
Tom?
else can jump in here, but I did use the word serve. And I think it was important to put that first, because I really see police officers as servants to the community. I'm from a family of police officers. My father, my brother, nephews, and so, and I think that's how they see it. In what capacity, I guess, is the question. And keep us safe, protect our rights.
Well, I meant by serving, I think, just, the part of serving is, educating people, so they understand, what goes into all these aspects of their jobs, how it impacts, and it doesn't have to be a negative. It should be, focused more on positive, aspects, prevention, a lot of these types of things, a lot of the questions when I was looking at these, I just think, so much more could be done if they spent time, just, promoting, the entire community, working towards, coming up with solutions to some of the problems that face the city, not, so they don't get to the police level, hopefully. I hate the idea that it should not always fall on the police to handle a lot of these situations. I think that's just unfair to them as an agency.
So Dana, that kind of piggybacks on maybe the next question that I might ask. And this is again for the whole group. What ways can we improve better policing and relationships with the community, either through the police department or through the group that you are currently representing, maybe?
I would love to go. There's a couple things that I thought about being a person of color and living in Jamestown. I initially thought about the police taking a community approach, meeting with residents, learning about some of the different things they're going through, some of the concerns that they have, and working with people on an individual level to address concerns. That was one thing. And then I also thought about addressing things from a culturally diverse perspective, like providing services in languages other than English, given the fact that we have so many Latinos in our community. These are the type of things that I think, now I don't know how the process works, but recruiting police officers from different ethnic backgrounds that bring different perspectives help to create, the service of the police where they're a little bit more empathetic and receptive to the concerns of people in the community. So like those are some of the things that I think about that need to be done in order to strengthen the bonds between people in the community and make everyone feel inclusive, as if the police is working in their favor. And that will stem the tide of some of the distrust and apprehension that many people of color have that I am familiar with in relation to their interactions that take place with the police.
Thank you, Chris. Anyone else?
You're welcome.
I just feel like, I think everybody, police included, really need to, spend time and be made to, deal appropriately with their own feelings, their own biases, their own, approaches, that they do have. They need to really, have a forum to, in a transparent, nature to deal with these feelings that everyone has, you know, and I think that impacts how everybody responds to things, you know, and I don't think, you know, they always really truly understand that. So I think, you know, that they need to have that forum to be able to discuss those, to get those out, you know, so they can be, so they can continue to work on them to improve.
Dana, when you mentioned transparency, that kind of dovetails into another portion of a question that is asked. What do you as a community, as either a community in Jamestown or an education community, think of when you think of the term transparency?
Well, I just think, you know, everybody understanding, you know, what their goals are, what their, you know, when it, you know, everyone talks about training, you know, I mean, people need to know what trainings involve, you know, what do police officers do, you know, as far as, you know, improving their response, you know, so, you know, it's not something where, you know, where we see too much of the overreactions, you know, possibly, you know, and, you know, how they deal with specific situations, you know, how are those, you know, how do they work through these issues? How do they process them? You know, and what goes into this? I just think nobody really understands, you know, what trainings they really do participate in.
Okay. Anyone else?
I feel police officers and ranking members somehow, I don't know, obviously the details of training and police academy stuff, but they shouldn't be shy about policing themselves also when it comes to transparency. It's a strategy that you know can be effective when you want improvement in an organization, that there should be an openness and you know, that kind of stuff. So an officer doesn't have to feel that they have to cover for another officer's mistake or something, that they did some, you know, issue, and then all of a sudden there's a cover up. So I feel there should be some sort of an encouragement somehow in the training that it is perfectly fine to talk about issues that happen on the road and day-to-day activities, and they shouldn't be afraid of being, you know, perhaps chastised for it for some reason. So,
thank you, Sam.
I think that's a very good point. I think all of us would feel like the teacher, I wouldn't want poor teachers or teachers that were doing something that I felt was they shouldn't be doing as a teacher. I would feel an obligation to report that. I want to be very transparent about that. And I would think it would be the same on a police force. You'd want to either remove or, you know, somehow discipline officers who were doing something that was, you know, just, I guess, inconsistent with what their job is. And having the ability to do it without feeling like, oh, I'm, you know, somehow breaking this oath of like loyalty we have towards each other.
Aren't those systems already in place for our police officers? I mean, don't they have that?
I feel like there might be an unwritten rule that you don't do that in a department. And that's got to change. And as it was said, I think that's something that needs to be addressed.
I think if we get to a point where, I don't know exactly how the process works, but if we get to a point where we can have some agencies maybe that are involved in certain things like data collection and investigation outside of what's going on at, you know, a local precinct or something of that nature, then maybe there would be less bias if there are other parties involved, and maybe they would be less, you know, or less likely to cover up things or to do things that would show the police in a negative light. I almost feel like you need some type of outside entity to ensure that, conclusions are correct and people will be less, distrustful of what actually takes place and when a lot of these things happen. I think that's important. And then you get into accountability, because if you have a process that's more transparent, then maybe you have less corrupt practices. Maybe people question decisions and verdicts less. And that will help the community as a whole, I think, if it goes into things of that nature.
From an education standpoint, if you're at your middle and high school level, I'm kind of going a little bit more focused on your respective levels and roles. What kind of interaction do you have with law enforcement? I know that the high school has an SRO and some of the red shirts, but what kind of relationship exists with your schools and law enforcement, and how do you work with each other, and in what instances do you need them to come in for like a support piece?
A high school's perspective, I mean, I can't say enough about our relationship with the Jamestown Police. I mean, they've been so responsive to anything we've ever needed. I mean, it's been a fantastic relationship. I mean, even going back to when we had our night school program. I mean, prior to the time I got to that night school program, we heard various things that might not have been as positive, because there were police that were there every night. But all I can speak to is from the time I worked in that program, the police were involved. There was a police officer there every evening, and that really became overall a positive, because they worked with some of our highest risk kids, and the rapport that they developed with these kids just transferred to as some of these young people became older, to the point where if they ever did experience problems, these individuals would seek out these police officers that they were familiar with. They'd always want to talk to them, so I learned right then and there that if we can really have a lot of involvement with the police, with young people, especially the ones that are at risk, develop some of that rapport. I think it just does nothing but really pay off in the long run. I mean, right now we don't even have a contract at the Jamestown Public Schools with our SRO program, due to potential money issues, and that's going to be a huge problem, because getting to see how all of the SROs that we've had over the years interact with kids, how the kids respond so positively to them, just gravitate towards them, want to see them, want to work with them, I mean, especially when we have a good SRO with a great, personality that can, be a really good spokesperson for the police overall. So, I think that just leads to a big need area of, just really, continuing that involvement in positive ways with young people in our community. I think that's very, very, very important.
Yeah, to piggyback on what Dana just said, Tim, we've gone through, Dana, like what, 6 or 7 SROs? We've had a few ever since Mel Peach held the reign forever, but but what those SROs have done with our kids has been phenomenal, really mentoring essentially our kids. So getting to the point where we've had SROs pick up kids and take them grocery shopping and buy them food, and attending all of their extracurriculars. They really are mentors to our kids. They go to their basketball games that they're having within the community. They attend these different things for the kids because they create such a strong bond with our kids, and they do seek out our at-risk kids. And what they've done with those kids has been phenomenal. And like Dana said, they seek out our SROs in the community and at outside community events. So in your question about what we could do to build relationships with the community, and anything that we could do to fund, and I know that the district is not going to be able to do this anytime soon, but to bring SROs back because of that rapport that they can establish and make such an impact with our kids. That would be the top priority in my mind.
Yeah. I also have to add that, like Bob Samuelson, who works for JPD, I've had a long standing, rapport with him. I mean, it doesn't matter when. It could be day, night, weekends, whatever. If there's ever a problem, I mean, just this past Sunday, one of our assistant principals was getting messages from a young girl that was cutting, needed help. I called Bob Samuelson and said, can we get some help over there to check on this girl? Within 5 minutes, they had somebody over there helping her, got her, transported her to the hospital where she could get help. Like I said, it just happened, boom, boom, just like that. I mean, they never hesitate, so like I said, there's a lot of positives.
Yeah, we had a SRO last year before, and then we had to cut it for this year. And it's too bad because I would bring him into my government class and he would talk to the kids. So, about all kinds of issues. And I really felt that was a great way to connect, young people with police officers. So if we can't, maybe we could bring them in as guest speakers in classes, possibly. They're always happy to do that when I've asked, so that might be an option.
Mm-hmm.
I think to piggyback on the conversation about the relationships that are built between the SROs and the students, it's so important because so many of our kids will feel comfortable speaking to our SROs and reporting things that might be taking place in their homes outside of school, and because they know that that person has been in our building, they've developed that relationship with them, and they feel comfortable speaking with them. Over the years, we've had several students that have been able to successfully report something that's happened in their homes or in their community, but because they trust that person. And so I think that that's critical. And if there's any way to, maybe further down the road, expand the SRO program even into the elementary schools, even if on a rotational basis, because I think that it's important that our kids get to know police officers and know them as people and what they can do to help the community, and building those relationships early on. I think that carries all the way through their lives. And I think that that's just really important for the kids to be able to see that and have that connection.
I don't really have anything to add about that. I just want to stress that I agree with what everyone just said. As a school counselor in a middle school, I've had wonderful experiences with our SROs, very professional. The kids, like everyone said, they just love them. So it's been nothing but a positive experience on my end too. Very supportive.
I agree with Kate too. Thinking back over the years at our SROs, the best SROs are almost like another counselor in the building, and they spend a lot of their time just talking to kids and listening and supporting them. A lot of time they know the student's family, their parents. There's been other interactions, and the kids connect and will often, seek them out when they are having problems or need advice. So.
I just like to ask a question. Do you feel that all the students in the building are connecting with these SROs? Are there, some, there's some kids who just don't connect to anything. And so I'm just kind of wondering, I mean, this is, I'm not, trying to, demean what everybody is saying, but it kind of seems like a love fest, which was a beautiful thing. Don't get me wrong, it's a beautiful thing, if everything is going on, but there's still sometimes always like a pocket of students that just don't connect to anything. Yeah. Teachers, they don't connect to counselors, they don't they don't connect to programs. They're just out there doing their own thing. So I was just kind of wondering, do you see any of that, or is everything just wonderful?
Well,
Vicki, you're absolutely right, Vicki. There are kids that are like fitting a square peg in a round hole sometimes in school, and no, you're right. We all see it, I think, in schools.
You're right, because I see it on my end with the Spanish-speaking students. They don't connect too much because of the language, I think they're afraid to connect with them because they don't understand each other. So I see it with the Spanish-speaking kids. There's not a connection there, not really. maybe some of them that speak, that understand it, but not all of them.
Right.
The ones that are more important, the ones that really need it the most, are afraid to connect.
Yeah, I mean, I do that sometimes, but I also see that there's a lot of kids that, again, it depends on the skills of the individual SRO. I mean, some of them have skills in certain areas that others maybe don't. Some of them are more outgoing than some, some are quieter, that we've had, like Leslie said, we've had several, but one thing I've noticed is, there's always those kids that maybe they don't seem to gravitate towards even a lot of the school professionals. I mean, I can think of faces and names and everything. I can't obviously throw those out here, but those are the ones that tend to gravitate towards our SRO, and, I can't help but feel sometimes that if it wasn't for that SRO, those are kids that wouldn't be connecting with anyone. So yeah, it's definitely not, everyone,
Yeah.
especially in a building of 1,300. But, just thinking about the last SRO that we had, I mean, I can honestly say that SRO, Mike Morgani, I mean, he knew just about every kid's name, which is phenomenal. I mean, when we needed to ID anybody, we'd go right to him. If we were looking for somebody, we were looking at our cameras and who is this? Who is this? Who is, he'd always know. He'd know things, he'd know about them. So again, that's a credit to him.
Yeah, that was phenomenal. I mean, we knew kids that we saw frequently, but Mike, he knew every single kid, and he made it a point to know every kid in that building.
Yep. And what says something like when we'd have an assembly and the biggest round of applause goes for our uniformed police officer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Vicky, also to quickly address that question, sometimes the kids who are what they may be referenced as trouble kids or troublemaker kids, they don't want to get close to the police officers anyways, or they don't want to get close to the teachers either. So you'll have that contingency. But I think the comments were in the general picture, in the big picture, there's a good reception to being, able to communicate with all the police officers or red shirts that we have here. So.
I want to kind of twist this question a little bit. It might be a little bit of a loaded question in that for the schools, in that and this just comes from the time that I spent working with the schools and recognizing that there's only a point to where the SRO or law enforcement can go under their umbrella, under their jurisdiction, under what they're supposed to operate with. So when they can only get to a certain point, I guess, how do you push through that if it's frustrating or if it's not frustrating? And B, is there something that can be, it can be handed off to some service or something to kind of pick up where the SRO has to stop? I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear. Because, we think about justice and we think about law enforcement, and, depending on what you're looking at, there's only so much an SRO or a police officer can do, and then they have to say, there's nothing more I can do. Does that become like a frustration or a difficult thing to navigate through, or a challenging piece for you to navigate through?
From the high school's perspective, I'd say not necessarily. I mean, because, it doesn't matter who the adult is in our building. We always want to, keep people, working within the confines of their own responsibilities. So there are some things where, we want another professional to, take the ball and run with it. So it's, sometimes I think it's easy for some individuals to try to do too much, and so again, just like I was talking about, having the entire community involved with, helping to work on some of the problems that, any area, city would have, it's the same thing in a school. We always want to avoid having our school, our our teachers, our staff have, you know, require too much of our SRO, you know, because sometimes that happens. They want them to do everything. You know, anytime there's a problem, they want to call our SRO, you know, and we always have to, and Leslie can probably attest to this too, because we worked together for a while. You know, it's like, you know, don't always call on the SRO and put them in that position. Other people have a hand in solving these problems and working through these issues, you know, but sometimes, you know, and I got to say, maybe it's sometimes that's the way the community works too. You know, I mean, it's like, you know, okay, there's a problem, you know, let's have the police handle it. The police handle it. The police handle it. You know, that's, you know, a lot of situations I got to, you know, assume would be better served not relying on the police, you know, and, you know, not overtaxing, overstressing them. So, you know, just like the whole school has to be responsible for, you know, dealing with situations and kids and issues that come up, I think the community as a whole has to do that also. I don't know if I answered your question.
You know, and you did, because, you know, I remember when I was there, it was kind of like something happened on social media, right? And so it gets brought into the school, or something happens at so-and-so's house, or something, you know, over the weekend, and it escalates and it becomes a school issue. And I just wasn't sure, or it may be a social services issue or a CPS issue. And from my observation, and that was just for me coming in, popping in and leaving, there seemed to be a level of frustration with not necessarily law enforcement. I think they're doing the best that they could, but within the law, but with some of the things that they just were out of their control, that just became frustrating. And that's kind of where I was. And so were there other things to connect with when law enforcement can only go so far, or there's just nothing we can do? You know, tell them not to do it again.
We try to work with probation, you know, and a lot of the other agencies, but, you know, I guess the frustrating part is sometimes, you know, you know, especially from a school's perspective, what you think needs to happen, you know, how to get kids, you know, what they need, you know, but a lot of times you run into those things where there's really no agency that can really take care of things like you'd like them to be done, you know, and that is the frustrating part, you know, and I think the law enforcement feels that too. You know, I mean, if others can't deal with some of these issues, it's going to continue to fall on law enforcement.
Yeah, I would agree with Dana. I would say my frustration working in the schools has not been toward law enforcement, and that we're dealing with things that, you know, are out of their realm or that they have to stop with. It's just, my frustration comes from other agencies feeling like they're letting us down, that we aren't getting the support for our kids that we need. That's frustrating.
So I want to see if I understood you correctly, Leslie. It's maybe not as much of a connected services for your kids. I mean, when you say other agencies let you down, do you just feel like they're not as involved or as connected or have as
follow through? Yeah.
Okay.
Those things, yes. Everything you said.
Well, and the reason I say that is because, you know, when we write a report, I think it becomes, the way I look at it is, it's not just law enforcement, it's a community responsibility. And so we can't expect, like Dana was saying, we can't expect law enforcement to do everything, but who stands in the gap when law enforcement can only go so far?
Well, those kids that continue to have some problems, you know, again, when we've gotten, you know, probation involved. And again, I'm not blaming probation, because again, they do what they're able to do. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's funding, sometimes it's a lot of things that go into that. But, you know, I've told this story a billion times. Leslie can plug her ears because she's heard it probably 1,000 times. But, you know, like when we go to other cities, you know, I remember driving around the city of Cleveland when we were going to different schools, and we were going with some different social workers that were taking us around, you know, and we'd ask them, you know, if when kids don't come to school, you know, and they're not coming and they're refusing and they're on pins, and then they go to on probation, and they continue to not come to school, what happens? And they looked at me like, what are you talking about? If they're on probation, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're violated, and they're sent to a you know, they're maybe put in a residential facility or something like that, you know, they're required to follow their probation. You know, and you know, so a lot of times in Jamestown, it doesn't happen that way, you know, because, you know, they'll have probationary, you know, requirements that they're supposed to follow. The kids find out, you don't really got to follow those, you know, because nothing's going to happen to you anyways. So again, it just continues to be that never ending cycle of kids just continuing to, you know, do this, act up, you know, get in trouble, you know, and again, like I said, falls back on the police nonstop, you know. So like I said, it's a huge problem. There's no easy.
It is.
I get that. You know, I'm not saying I'm not saying I want kids taken out of homes and put in facilities like that or either, but like I said, sometimes, you know, it's just seems like there's no end to the problems.
No, I completely understand that, Dana. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
I think another important part of the question that you asked me was that we really think of our SROs as part of our administrative team. And so when we do have situations that we might need to involve the police in, it's great to be able to have that resource right there on site to be able to bring in and to be able to talk through the situation to find out whether or not they're able to assist us in some way, if it's a legal matter or if it's a social services matter, or what is it that we can do or can't do. So that's always really helpful to have that. And any of the SROs that we've ever had have always been a great resource for us. It's just like another piece to the administrative team in our building.
Good, good. Is there anything that maybe we didn't touch upon that you might want to add for, you know, for us to be able to look at this police reform from your vantage point, and to be able to, if it's not the actual police department, then other areas that we may need to include in this plan, or things we need to think about as we create the plan?
And the one thing that comes to mind for me is really thinking about the mental health side of all of this, whether it's with our kids, with their parents, with the families. There's this tremendous mental health piece that is just not being addressed for whatever reason. And that's basically what I'm speaking to when I speak to the fact that I feel like agencies are letting us down and letting our kids down. I feel that if we were much better as a community at addressing those needs, whether we're talking about elementary age kids right on up through, then I think that it wouldn't spiral out of control to what it becomes with a lot of these situations that our police department has to deal with. But that's something that we need to work together as a team, a community team to work to fix, because that system is definitely broken and failing our kids.
Tammy, one thing that I keep coming across is the de-escalation training and practices, and I think that's a good SRO I've seen is really good at calming things down. And I think we need to see that in all policing and training for that, because some people are naturally good at that, and I think, but there's training. I think there's procedures that they could be taught and retaught. You know, we all attend, you know, in-service days, and sometimes they're valuable, sometimes they're not as valuable, but it's always good to be, you know, to learn new things, new tactics, new strategies. So it should be redone. It should be retaught maybe, you know, I don't know, every year, every other year. It's a thought.
I agree completely. I think, you know, people need to realize and continue to remember how difficult a job it really is. You know, the police officers really have, you know, of having to respond to everything that goes on in this city. I think there's a lot of people within this city that have no idea what goes on around this town. Okay. I mean, how very, very, I mean, there's some major big problems. Okay, I think about, you know, back when this pandemic started, when we were taking work around to kids, you know, taking it to their homes. We enlisted some of our teachers to go around to the homes and, you know, take this work. So they all trotted off with their work. They came back, a lot of them looking like they'd seen a ghost. They couldn't believe it, because they finally went out and saw some of the, just the difficulties that some of these people are having, how they're living, the areas that they're living in. A lot of people just, they can ignore that. Okay. But, it's not possible for the police. So I just hope that people continue to realize it's a very tough job, but, like was said, get them, that de-escalation training. I mentioned earlier, having some of the work so they can address their own feelings, their own biases, their own, how they approach things, from a cultural perspective, because it is impacting how they do respond, and we're seeing it more and more, and it can't continue, but it has to be addressed just consistently, constantly. So just really forcing, I guess, that whole process.
You mentioned the cultural bias, and that was one of the things I was wondering, have any of you, as teachers kind of, witnessed that, because we, like you said earlier, we all have our biases. Mm-hmm. And, but I was just kind of wondering, have you kind of noticed any of that with, not only just the SORs, but just with your students as you talk with them, their experiences that they may have shared with you? So I'm just kind of interested to see what you have to say about that.
I'd say absolutely. I think it's there, and anyone that would say it's not there is just kidding themselves. Okay. Our school, our teachers, what is it? 99% white middle class upbringing people, that their lens is always from that perspective, and trying to get them out of that perspective to look at it differently. We try to do things, we try to have in-services, we try to have, trainings that address those types of things, but, and it works for a while, but they just, kind of revert back to, that old way of thinking. We're always trying, with our Hispanic population, trying to get them to, our staff to always understand, look at their culture, as far as, it's not how you see things, look at it, how they do things, how they are raised, how, some of the things they've had to overcome coming in here, language barriers, learning a new language, and how that impacts education. So yeah, it's a constant struggle. Yeah, it really is.
And Vicki, to what you just said, I've had a lot of students share with me stories, personal stories, the reasons why they feel like they, can't trust or aren't going to open up to a police officer or not say hello to them because whether it's, their parents have told them you don't ever trust them, or just different things that, their house has been raided and they don't understand why that happened. The different things that can happen personally within the kids' lives that makes them have just a different view of, of any person that's in a uniform. So I think that community outreach piece really works to help offset that and make kids see, because we have to mend that and fix that, right? We used to have an officer that was part of the SWAT team, and there were times he would come in late at the high school because they were doing raids in the morning, and he knew that it was, some of our kids' homes, and he would come in and go see those kids and make sure they were okay and check on them and that, because, we all know it's not the kids' fault. But I think that that's important too, to understand that a lot of these kids are coming in from, they have their own personal stories as to why they feel that way. And those are things that we need to work through with the kids.
And going on with that, Leslie, I think that's why it's so important to have police officers in the schools, because at a young age, they start to see them in they have their own opinion and they have their own experiences, not just what's being told to them. And that's why I see such a positive, impact of them being in the schools at a young age.
I think it gets down to like any, any type of, agency, business, whatever, there's the majority of the people I think are very good. They're very, well-meaning, they want to do the best that they can, but just, there's always individuals that might not be cracked up to be, you know, whether it's police officers, teachers, whoever, you know, they might not be cut out to work with kids. Maybe they got into the, you know, some of these businesses for the wrong reasons, you know, and sometimes that needs to be addressed. You know, if there are individuals that are not cut out to be police officers, that needs to be dealt with. You know, just like I said, at the school, we, you know, sometimes we see the same thing, you know, so, but I do think that overall, you know, I think the ones that I've worked with in the city, they do have a good, you know, good way of you know, presenting themselves in a positive demeanor, you know, that reflects on the job that they do. So.
Some of former students who a while back shared information with me about interaction with police officers at the time. I can talk about multiple different scenarios, and some of these scenarios could fit in a different group, not this particular stakeholder group that might fit in the faith-based group that I was not invited to. But I'll go ahead and I'll give you one example. One student a while back did share with me that at one point during an interaction with a police officer somewhere in town, the student was made to feel that as if he didn't live in that particular address. So I wonder how, you know, the training goes when or if the question gets, you know, in the mind, do certain students or certain residents in the city get treated based upon where they live, you know, socioeconomically and or religious / cultural / linguistic backgrounds? That's another question I think should be addressed. How is that, you know, pans out? Because this was an actual story that I know about. I'm very, very familiar with that I'm sharing some snippet of that with you. Plus others that I'm going to reserve the rest of that to a different group. So.
Does anybody have anything left to add that we maybe didn't touch upon? Well, I know your time is valuable, and I really appreciate all of the feedback that you've given us. That we're still doing stakeholder groups. I asked Tony Doltz if he would talk with students, so we're still going to be doing that. But if there's anything that you can think of that we didn't address that you can think of later, and you want to shoot any one of us on council an email or myself, that we would appreciate it. Any ideas that you have. After all the stakeholder groups, we're going to sit down and look at some trends with all the conversations, and then begin to formulate a plan. So if there's something that you really want to make sure that we address that we didn't talk about today, please let us know, and we'll make sure that we make that a priority to discuss.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Everybody have a great day.
Thanks. You too.
You too.
Bye-bye.